World of Warfare presents The Holocaust. Considered one of the most horrific events in human history, the Holocaust of the late 1930s and early to mid-1940s involved the state-sponsored persecution and mass murder of millions of Jews, Romani people, the intellectually disabled, political dissidents, and homosexuals by the Nazi regime. Derived from the Greek words holos, or hole in the English, and kastos, or burned, the terms were used historically to describe a sacrificial offering burned at a religious altar. By the end of the Holocaust in 1945, some 6 million Jews and 5 million others targeted for racial, behavioral, ideological, and political reasons had died in the Holocaust, including more than 1 million children, taking the lives of 2/3 of all Jews on the European continent. While Hitler and the Nazis took the persecution and murder of Jews to an olympiad level, anti-Semitic violence against Jews has long been etched in human history, beginning in ancient Roman times, when Roman authorities destroyed the Jewish temple in Jerusalem before forcing the Jews to leave Palestine. On July 18th of 1290, English King Edward I issued his Edict of Expulsion royal decree, expelling all Jews from the Kingdom of England. Following the Black Death of 1347 and 1348, an event which took the lives of roughly half of Europe's population, a series of violent mass attacks against Jews erupted throughout the continent after fabricated stories arose about a group of rabbis bent on killing Christians by poisoning city wells with plague. From 1348 to 1351, acts of violence broke out in Toulon, Barcelona, and cities in Aragon and Castile, Basel Switzerland, Frankfurt, Strasbourg, and Speyer Germany, the later residents stuffing murdered Jews into wine barrels before floating them down the Rhine. The Jewish massacre of 1391 occurred in Spain on June the 5th, when more than 4,000 Jews were murdered in Seville, followed by the expulsion of Jews from Spanish soil in 1492, the same year Christopher Columbus set sail for the New World. 2 years later, King Charles VI of France expelled all Jews from the French kingdom on September 17, 1394, further illuminating Europe's enduring hatred toward the Jewish people due to Christianity's persistent and lingering belief that the Jews killed Christ. Flash forward to early 20th century, when Adolf Hitler joined the National German Workers' Party shortly after the end of World War I, which then morphed into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazis. After his failed attempt to take control of the Bavarian government in an infamous coup d'etat known as the Beer Hall Putsch of 1923, Adolf Hitler wrote the first volume of Mein Kampf during his confinement at Landsberg prison, dictated by his loyal friend and fellow revolutionary Rudolf Hess. Translated into the English as My Struggle, Hitler's autobiographical Mein Kampf reminisces about his time in Vienna, when at first he was tolerant of the Jews and Slavs he met there, dismissing the anti-Semitic press as unworthy of his consideration. As his 400-plus page diatribe presses on, however, Hitler's views about Jews and non-Aryan races would devolve into full-on racism, furthering the long-standing fabrication about a Jewish plot to control the world. In Hitler's view, the German state was not an economic or social entity, but a racial one, affirming that the only way to revitalize Germany was an insistence on Aryan purity and the removal of all non-Aryan races. He also called for Lebensraum, or living space, which saw the need for Germany to expand eastward into Russia by pushing out or eradicating the Slavic people. Hitler went on to write that the nationalization of our masses will succeed only when, aside from all the positive struggle for the soul of our people, their international poisoners are exterminated, making a clear reference to his future plans for a final solution. The Holocaust began in earnest after Hitler came to power in 1933, when by the end of the year, some 27,000 people had been placed in protective custody at Germany's early concentration camps. Of the slightly more than 500,000 Jews in Germany, roughly 1% of the German population, huge Nazi rallies were held against Jews, communists, liberals, and foreigners, leading to symbolic acts such as public book burns of Jewish or communist books, before the Third Reich began dismissing non-Aryans from civil service, at the same time liquidating Jewish-owned businesses and stripping Jewish doctors and lawyers of their clients. Under the Nuremberg laws of 1935, if a person had 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents, they were considered a Jew, while those with 2 Jewish grandparents earned the title Mischling or half-breeds. Despite the rising wave of anti-Semitism, violence remained minimal until November 7th of 1938, when 17-year-old Herschel Greenspan took action when the Nazis exiled his parents from Hanover, Germany, to Poland, shooting German diplomat Ernst von Rath in Paris. When Rath passed away from his wounds 2 days later, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels used Rath's assassination to rile the Nazi base into an anti-Semitic frenzy, resulting in Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. Beginning in the late night hours of November 9th and raging well into the next day, SS troops and common citizens alike vandalized or torched more than 1,000 synagogues throughout Germany, including thousands of Jewish homes, schools, businesses, hospitals, and cemeteries, leading to the murder of nearly 100 innocent Jewish lives. By the end of the violence, more than 7,500 Jewish businesses had been looted. In the aftermath of the nationwide violence, the Nazis held the Jewish community responsible for all damages, assessing fines upwards of $400 million in 1938 currency, at the same time arresting more than 30,000 Jewish men who were sent to concentration camps throughout Germany. The violence of Kristallnacht served notice to Jews throughout Germany and the rest of Europe, forcing many to flee their homelands for neutral or safe countries. For many who failed to flee Germany or landed in countries that fell to Nazi occupation during World War II, most were murdered by the Einsatzgruppen or in extermination camps. After Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939, setting off the Second World War, German Schutzstaffel, or SS police, drove tens of thousands of Polish Jews into ghettos, confiscating their businesses and homes to give to ethnic Germans living in Poland. Surrounded by high walls and barbed wire, Jews were held captive in ghettos governed by Jewish councils, under ever-worsening conditions of unemployment, poverty, and hunger, overcrowding, and the resultant poor sanitation that led to the spread of infectious diseases such as typhus and cholera. Meanwhile, beginning in the fall of 1939, the Nazis performed their first acts of mass murder when institutionalized mental patients and people with physical disabilities were summarily gassed to death under their so-called euthanasia program. After prominent German religious leaders vehemently protested the killings, Hitler ended his euthanasia program in August of 1941. Experiments in mass killing techniques began in June of 1941, culminating in the gassing of 500 Polish officials and 500 Soviet POWs at Auschwitz with the pesticide Zyklon-B. After witnessing the effectiveness of the gas, Heinrich Himmler's SS soon placed a massive order for more Zyklon-B from a German chemical company, ominously foretelling the worsening Holocaust to come. As Germany's cruel treatment of Polish Jews intensified, trapped ghetto dwellers fought back during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of April 10th to May 16th, 1943, ending in the deaths of 7,000 Jews, while 50,000 Jewish survivors were sent to extermination camps, at the same time inspiring similar revolts in camps and ghettos across German-occupied Europe. While Hitler was the ideological ringleader for the extermination of Europe's Jews, Heinrich Himmler and his SS Guard were the actual instruments of death. taking control of the German secret police or Gestapo in 1934, Himmler declared his SS above the law and unaccountable to the civil courts, thereby creating a perfect instrument of state terror. By the late 1930s, Himmler had risen to become one of the most powerful men in the Nazi state machine, second only to Hitler, spearheading the genocide of Eastern European Jews and non-Aryan races to create Hitler's envisioned Lebensraum. Himmler's ethnic cleansing of Poland marked the historical beginning of the Holocaust, during the Nazis' accelerating ambition to alter the racial landscape of the European continent. Meanwhile, back in Germany, Himmler's SS men began dragging Jews out of their homes, beating them, stripping them of clothes and possessions before herding them into ghettos. When the ghettos became too crowded or difficult to control, Himmler's SS began shipping them off to newly constructed concentration camps, which would top more than 44,000 camps throughout Europe by the end of the war. The first to open its doors was Dachau, northwest of Munich, before announcing the existence of such camps to the German public at large as a warning to radicals, Jews, gypsies, and political dissidents. For Himmler, his growing number of camps served a secondary purpose, in that they realized his dream for a mass genetic and racial cleansing throughout Germany and occupied Europe. His plans to eradicate undesirables from the growing German Empire received a boost when he formed a special SS task force known as Einsatzgruppen, whose purpose was to follow the German army across Europe for purposes of murder and ethnic cleansing. To effect his goal, Himmler appointed Reinhard Heydrich, head of his Einsatzgruppen death squads, a man who Hitler himself referred to as the man with the iron heart, a man considered by many historians to be the most brutal of all high-ranking Nazi officers. Most Einsatzgruppen officers had earned postgraduate degrees from universities, where a part of their job was to reassure ordinary German troops that the mass murders that went on before their eyes and at their own hands was scientifically and morally justified. At the start of the killing spree, Bruno Müller, once a Nazi lawyer and now an Einsatzgruppen officer, taught one group of soldiers what their responsibility was to the motherland, singling out a woman and her child before shooting both victims dead. Over the next 3 days, Müller's Einsatzgruppen unit murdered 24,000 Jewish men, women, children, and babies. Over the course of the war, no more than 3,000 men were employed in the Einsatzgruppen, and yet they murdered nearly 2 million people between them, which constitutes the first major killing stage of Hitler's final solution, nicknamed by some historians as the Holocaust by bullets. After a time, however, the scale of the killings began to affect the men of the Einsatzgruppen and the troops they oversaw, for despite reassurances by Einsatzgruppen officers that what they were doing was scientifically and morally good, troops began to crack under the weight of so many executions. Murder-weary soldiers soon turned to alcohol abuse to dampen their depression. Many committed suicide before Himmler decided that a new form of mass murder was in order, something much more efficient, clinical, and mechanized, leading Himmler to order the construction of Belzec on October 13th of 1941, the first of several purpose-built extermination camps. He then decreed that the Jews of Eastern Europe should be loaded onto trains and sent to death camps, followed by the Jews of Western Europe once the East was purged. The full horror of what went on in the death camps only becomes clear after Allied soldiers enter them in the final weeks of the war in Europe, creating carefully recorded films that to this day contain the most disturbing images ever captured by camera. Death was everywhere, and those still alive barely clung to life. In Auschwitz and other liberated camps, Allied cameras documented the gas chambers, where plaster walls showed the imprints of countless hands of the dying, who clawed hopelessly for a way to escape the gas. Cameras documented the crematoria, where the SS tried to eliminate the evidence of their crimes. Captured guards revealed the magnitude of the killings within 8 giant chambers and 46 crematoria, each chamber capable of gassing 2,000 people every 90 minutes. In Auschwitz-Birkenau alone, the factory-style extermination center witnessed the deaths of 1.3 million people alone. During the Nuremberg war crimes trials after the war, a Nazi orderly described his daily working conditions. It took from 3 to 15 minutes to kill the people in the death chamber, depending upon climatic conditions. We knew when the people were dead because their screaming stopped. After the bodies were removed, our special commanders took off the rings and extracted the gold from the teeth of the corpses. What happened to the millions of dollars worth of gold remains a mystery. However, a 1988 Swiss commission estimated that the Swiss National Bank held 440 million in Nazi gold, some 9 billion in today's currency, over half of which is believed to have been looted. The Nazis also hoarded the clothes and possessions of their victims, while using the hair of their victims to weave socks for soldiers on the front. While death by gassing or starvation or bullets was heinous beyond comprehension, Auschwitz-Birkenau possessed an extra level of depravity upon the arrival of Dr. Joseph Mengele in 1943, after he was reassigned from his post as a battalion medical officer. Nicknamed the Angel of Death by camp victims, Mengele and other SS doctors conducted selections on incoming prisoners, sparing the lives of those deemed fit enough to work, while those deemed unfit were immediately sent to the gas chambers. Roughly 3/4 of all inbound victims were given instant death sentences in the gas chambers, including almost all children, women with small children, pregnant women and the elderly, as well as others deemed unfit after a superficial inspection by an SS doctor. While most SS doctors viewed the selection process as a stressful, unpleasant duty, Mengele took to the task with a flamboyance all his own, often smiling or whistling as he committed thousands to a death chamber. Receiving a research grant from the German Research Foundation, Mengele opened special barracks in the Romani family camp, where he studied identical twins with eyes of 2 different colors, dwarfs and people with physical abnormalities. He also studied blood proteins, performed anthropological studies of the Romani people, while sending specimens to the SS Medical Academy in Graz. When a gangrenous bacterial infection of the mouth and face struck the Romani family camp in 1943, a disease known as noma, he conducted controlled studies of the outbreak, curing one barracks with vitamins and antibiotics before discontinuing treatment for those cured, where almost all of them fell ill with noma yet again. Mengele's research into noma was still underway when all the remaining occupants of the Romani family camp were murdered in 1944. Mengele's eye research involved injecting chemicals or hormones into the eyes of his victims, and while some historians have speculated that Mengele was attempting to Aryanize his prisoners to make their eyes blue with dyes or other chemicals, other historians reject that claim, arguing that Mengele would not have been interested in a superficial cosmetic change that lacked any genetic meaning. In a 1945 deposition, one of Mengele's assistants testified that he watched Mengele kill 14 sets of twins in a solitary night, first by injecting Evipan to put them to sleep before injecting their hearts with chloroform, making the Holocaust an event that forever altered man's understanding of the depths of his own depravity.